One of the biggest mistakes that I see newbie property investors making is they watch a few episodes of Homes Under the Hammer, then they rush off to the auction room, start bidding for property like it's going out of fashion. Now, auctions can be a great place to buy property, but only if you know what you're doing. In this video, I'm going to give you the do's and don'ts of buying property at auction. Hey, if you're watching my videos for the first time, my name is Saj Hussain, and on this channel I share with you my 15 plus years of property investing experience to ultimately help you get further faster in your own property investing journey. Auctions can be a great place to buy property, but only if you know what you're doing. The reality is auction houses are set up by traders to sell property, mostly to other property professionals. So when the inexperienced venture off into auction rooms, they need to be careful that they don't get their fingers burnt. Auction rooms can also be a great indicator of what's going on in the market. So when their auction houses are really busy, they're selling most of the lots, that shows us a lot of confidence in the market. When we start seeing a lot of unsold lots, ones that are not selling at the auction, this shows that the confidence in the market is starting to slow down. So in recent times, we've seen packed rooms at auction houses, whereas during the last credit crunch in 2008-9, I remember at that time, you saw big auction rooms, maybe 10, 12 people sitting in the room, and most of the chairs were empty. Now, the property market is certainly going through some change right now. However, I don't think we're going to end up where we were before with these auction rooms empty. I certainly think there's going to be some rich pickings in those auction rooms. There's in fact 3 ways to buy property at auction. One is actually in the auction room itself. You turn up, put your hand up, which is the way that most people are familiar with. The other one is to buy property before the auction. I do a deal with the auctioneers before it goes into the auction room. Often you'll be paying above the guide price. You'll be paying a figure that's maybe acceptable to the seller to do a deal to prevent other people bidding on it as well. The third way to buy property is at the end of the auction when the property is unsold. So properties that will go through the auction and they're left unsold, it's still possible to do a deal with those properties. So they're the 3 different ways you can buy. Now, traditionally, it was going along to the auction room and bidding there, but more recently with COVID and the way we had lockdowns, a lot of auction houses moved to the online method where you could bid online. Getting a deal in the auction is all about knowledge. It's about having the information. So before we get started, before we actually start bidding a property, we need to be looking at what auctions are coming up. But actually, if we can go to some auction houses beforehand, just get familiar with the layout, the process, how they work, the catalogs, the registration process, the bidding process, just to get familiar with how things work before you actually start bidding. The catalogs also give you a good idea in terms of what the registration process is, but also how some of those fees work as well. But then when you are ready to actually bid on a property, what you want to be doing before the auction happens is to be looking at those properties, to go and view the properties. Now, when we're viewing properties, unless we've got some experience, often we may not know what we're looking for. So we want to take somebody experienced with us. And generally a survey on a property is an ideal thing to do. But if you think about this, you're going to maybe be looking at say 5, 6, maybe even 10 properties that you see at the auction. And then if you had a survey done on every single one of those at maybe £300, £400, £500 a time, you could be a lot of money out of pocket because you are not going to be purchasing all those properties, and it may even be you walk away without winning any of the bids as well. So it's not so practical to be able to do that, which is again why we're saying this is really for the professionals. And one of the things that you could do to really protect yourself is to use someone like a builder, a competent builder that can go with you to have a look at the property, and then they can give you some indication of what work needs to be done. Now, this is not quite the same as a survey, but it helps give you some understanding of that property depending on your level of experience. Now, what you see physically building wise is only one aspect of it. The other side of it is the legal side, i.e. the title's correct, or the paperwork in order, is any issues with the documentation. So you want to download the legal pack. This is all the information that will be provided for the sale, and often this will go to the solicitors for solicitors to review. But when you're potentially bidding on a property, you want to look at this documentation beforehand to know what it includes and what's in there and what the terms of the sale are before you start bidding on that property. Now, maybe you review the documentation, have some understanding of what's going on, but the best thing to do is to work with a solicitor and explain to the solicitor you're looking to purchase, to buy something from the auction, and it may not be every property you send them. So you're essentially asking them to look at a few different legal packs and agree a price with them, with a view that you're probably only going to purchase one, and then that property they'll do the conveyancing for you. And that way they're not charging you full price to review every single legal pack, which again, just like the surveys, can start mounting up quite quickly. But this is how you build your own skill up. You actually do the doing by walking around with the builder, looking at the property, get them to explain what needs doing, why it needs doing, get the solicitors to review the paperwork for you, get them to advise and guide you. whether it's a good deal or whether there's some problems they can see within the paperwork itself. When the property is listed at auction, it'll also have a guide price. Now that guide price isn't necessarily the sale price or the price it will get sold for, but it's a guide of where they think that property will be. And often it can be misleading because that guide price may be where the auction starts from as opposed to where it ends up. And then there'll be a reserve price as well, which they will not have announced and you will not know. But generally speaking, the reserve price tends to be about 10% more than the guide price. So for example, if the guide price is say 100,000 printed in the catalogue, the reserve price may be 110,000. And what that means is if the price in doing the bidding doesn't actually reach 110,000, it won't be sold. It'll be withdrawn from the auction. It's only if it goes beyond 110,000 that a sale can actually take place. During an auction, when the auctioneer brings that hammer down and says sold to the lady in the blue dress over there for £450,000, it doesn't actually mean that she's going to be paying £450,000 because we need to be aware of the other fees and costs that could be involved as well. So for example, when we're looking through the documentation, we need to make sure, for example, there's no VAT on the property because some properties might have VAT on them, generally more for commercial properties. And if there is VAT, that you're aware that there is VAT. And sometimes there'll also be fees that you need to pay towards the seller's legal costs. So there might be a contribution of fees that you need to pay for the seller. There'll also be a fee that needs to be paid to the auction house as well for purchasing that property through them as well. So it's important to understand what these costs will be. So when the hammer goes down and that price is announced, that figure actually is not what's paid because there'll be other fees that will need to be on top of that. And being able to work out what all those are beforehand will certainly put you in a good position knowing what your true budget is. The purchase may also attract stamp duty as well, so that's something else we need to be aware of and how that might impact the overall price in terms of what we pay for that particular property. The other thing that we want to sort out nice and early before we even get to the auction house is to know who the buyer actually is going to be. And by that, what I mean, not who you are, because clearly you know who you are. Is it yourself that's going to be purchasing that property in your personal name? Or is it a partnership, for example, that's going to purchase that property? Or maybe you've even set up a new limited company that's going to purchase that property into there. Because knowing these things means that you can take the time to get organized beforehand, because when you do the registration process, because the registration details that are on that document, that's who they'll be the buyer for the property. So when the hammer goes down, that's the buyer of that particular property. And this all comes back down to knowing what you're going to do with the property before you even start, which is not really the focus of this video, but having a clear plan of what's going to happen with that property will mean that you know how you want to acquire it, whether it's going to be a limited company, personal name, it's going to be a home, it's going to be investment, it's going to be a flip, it's going to be HMO, whatever it is that you're doing with it. Now, before we get onto the auction room itself, one of the final things to be thinking about is where's the money actually going to come from? Now, it might be you have loads of cash behind the sofa, which is fantastic. You're going to be using that cash to purchase, but for many people, they'll be using some kind of funding. Now we need to think about where's that funding going to come from. Often people make the mistake, but once they've agreed the purchase, i.e. the hammer goes down, they put their hand up, it's sold, then at that point they start thinking about the money and where's the money going to come from. But really the sensible thing to do is to be organising the funding before you even actually go into the auction room. And this, for example, could be bridging or bridging finance or finance that's specifically for auction type of property, often short-term lending. You can approach a bridger or a broker and have a conversation with them that you're looking to purchase at an auction, so they can look at what type of funding they can set up for you. So it may not be specific for that property, but what they'll be doing is to make sure that they're happy to lend to you as an individual, and they might tell you in principle we'll be happy to lend you this amount of money up to this type of value of property. Well, that'll give you a broad indication knowing that if you do bid for a property, how much is it that they're probably going to be able to fund you on that deal. Of course, the other advantage of using these types of lenders is that they specialize in speed, because these generally will be speedy transactions. You'll have to wrap up quite quickly. Most people assume that auction sales are 28 days, and often that is the case, but it isn't always the case, which is another reason why it's really important that you're reading the legal pack, because that will explain if there's a shorter time or any difference around that. Finally, it's the big day. It's the day of the auction. You're really excited. You get up, energized. You go to the auction and you're excited. It's buzzing. There's hundreds, if not thousands of people in that auction room, and you're thinking, hang on a minute, there's only 100 lots in the catalogue. If all these people are here to buy property, we're going to be in trouble. And sometimes that can be the case. There's a lot of people chasing the same property, or other times it could be there's just people there networking, meeting other people, chatting, as opposed to there to buy property. But if it's a full room, often that means there's a lot of people chasing the same property. Now, it's important that you'll have already worked out exactly what your numbers are. You've calculated what's the maximum you're prepared to pay on any particular lot. And beyond that, you're going to sit on your hands, right? It's really important that you stick to your numbers, because the way the auctioneers work, a lot of it is psychology. You get moments to make a decision. You'll be under a lot of pressure. So if you've already worked out the numbers, you can stick to those. When it comes to your lot, the auctioneer will display on the screen. You'll see which property is, and then they'll start the bids. It doesn't mean that you need to stick your hand up straight away to express an interest to say, hey, you want to start the bid. In fact, I would do quite the opposite. I'd just sit and wait. And when I sit and wait, what I'd ideally want to do is be standing or sitting somewhere where I can see the rest of the room. So I can see who else is interested. Effectively, I'm looking at the back of everybody else's heads to see if there's anybody else raising their arm and how much interest there might be in that property. Because if there isn't a lot of interest in the property, I don't want to be the one that starts that bidding off. I want to stop and wait to see if somebody else will start the bidding. In fact, my preferences or auctions, what I will do, I'll jump in late when all the auctioneers are slowed down, when it looks like it's starting to reach an end, and I would normally jump in at that point if it's still within the range of where I want to bid. Now, earlier I talked about a guide price and a reserve price. So if the guide price is 100,000 and the reserve is 110,000, what the auctioneer is allowed to do is take what we'd call bouncing off the wall or fake bids, if you like. What that means is if they start at £100,000 and they look around, they say, oh, 105 over there, 106, 108, 109. And it may be there's actually nobody there that's bidding. The auctioneer is legally allowed to do this, to take this up to the reserve price. Beyond that, they can't take these fake bids, but up to that, they could drive the price up to the reserve price, because underneath the reserve price, the property can't be sold anyway. So when you're standing in an ideal place, you can see what's going on in the room. You'll get a sense of what's going on. You'll see if there's any hands or indication going up, or is the auctioneer just essentially just trying to drive interest and drive up the price. Now remember, they're professionals at this. So when you get to your final figure and you think, hey, that's it, we're at 111,000 and that was my limit, I'm not going to go beyond that. And the auctioneer looks at you and he says, hey, look, you're not going to let them get it for £1,000. Go on, go £1,000 more. You come all this way. You've got to get. You don't want to miss out. And you're thinking, yeah, he's absolutely right. Okay, another 1,000. And then they'll go over to the other side and they'll encourage them to drive the price up, because that's what they do. Their job is to get that price up as high as it possibly can. And often people are not used to this amount of pressure and making decisions in such a short space of time, which is why it's really important that you worked out your numbers and your limit beforehand and you absolutely stick to them. When the auctioneer's gavel falls and you are the winning bid, that means you've just purchased the property. You are then at that point bound by the terms and conditions, and you have now formally exchanged contracts. So that means you're committed to the purchase and the seller is committed to selling the property to you. There's no backing out from either side. If there are, the penalties can be quite severe. Remember, at this point, you also should be insuring the property, because if anything happens, God forbid, if it burns down during the time that you've just won that bid to the time that you actually get the keys on completion, if anything happens to that property, that's your responsibility. So you want to make sure you've got some insurance cover in place as well. At this point, your solicitors will take over and do the work that they need to do, and your funders or your lenders, your bridges, whoever you're using for the finance, they'll get organized on their side and get that bit done. Now, let's say the figure goes way beyond what you thought it was going to be, which is sometimes the case, especially in a hot market like this. All is not lost. That's absolutely fine. It's not an issue. There'll be other deals that will come along as well. And you should have an abundant mindset when it comes to auctions, and not a scarcity one, thinking I need to get this deal, because often they're the people that pay the most money and most often will not get the best deals. But let's say on the other hand, the property doesn't sell. There wasn't either enough bids on it or it didn't quite reach the reserve price. Then that property will remain unsold. What to do with those properties once it's been marked as unsold is to go and talk to the auctioneers, not the one obviously doing the auction right now, but the other members of the team. You can have a chat with them about what will happen with that property, what is it that they're looking for, and essentially what you want to do is start a conversation, because the auctioneers will still be keen to do a deal. They'll still want to get this property sold, even if it didn't go through the normal auction process. So the seller at this stage is likely to be more flexible. Because if you think about it, if it's somebody that's looking to sell a property in auction, often that's because they want the speed, they want the certainty, they want to know that deal's going to get done quickly. But if it goes to the auction, it doesn't actually sell, that doesn't really leave them many other options. So the seller may be flexible at that point to try and get a deal done. And often you can do a better deal by picking up deals that were unsold at the auction rather than bidding for them during the auction itself. What I've talked about is really scratch the surface when it comes to auctions. There's so many tricks and things that go on in auctions that you really need to take the time to understand how an auction works before you go bidding within an auction. One other tip that I do want to leave for you is when you're looking at property, if you can spot something that's out of area, what that actually means is, for example, you're looking at a London auction where a Birmingham property is listed. Now, often what that means is that they've put it into an auction which was easy or convenient for whoever's selling it, as opposed to where the audience might be. So most people in London might be looking for London property property as opposed to a property that's a couple hundred miles away, 150 miles away. And what you'll find with a property like that is there's a lot less interest in that property. So often the figures achieved are a lot lower. So they can be great properties to look for. So these are properties that are what I'd call a bit of a misfit. They're out of area, listed in an auction house that's nowhere near the property itself. Hey, if you enjoyed this content, do me a favor, click on my face over here to subscribe to the channel. The YouTube algorithm tells me many of the people that watch these videos, they're not actually subscribers. You're enjoying the video, but you're not subscribed. And it really helps me out, just reach more people. So I really appreciate if you just click on my face over here, subscribe to the channel. And then once you've done that, then click on this video over here where I talk about the difference between buy to sell or buy to rent. So whether you should be keeping property for the long term or you should be flipping them on. So when you're looking at auctions, which is the right strategy for you? So I look forward to seeing you on this video next.